Great, Paul. Thanks very much for joining us. Then, so I wonder if we can go back to the beginning. Tell us about how you got into photojournalism in the first place and when that was.
Well, it was I actually started my career off in the military. I was in the army for 6 years in Germany, when it was the Cold War. But I'd always taken pictures. I was always fascinated by cameras. I left the army. I think it was in about '86, and I ended up going. I worked in a studio, a Liverpool recording studio, for a few years. But I was asked when the Balkans were in full flame, I was asked by an aid convoy that were taking stuff up to the Kosovo border, would I, come and take some pictures of the convoy? And so I took a bit of time off and I went with this. It's kind of crazy aid convoy. It was a mixture of like Sikhs and anarchists and road protesters who all banded together and got this group going up to the Balkans, and completely unaware of anything they were doing. They were just going. So it was actually a great assignment, picture wise and video wise. It was fantastic because it was such a varied lot. We got to the border. Amazingly, we made it to the border of Kosovo and Albania, and they dropped the aid off. And I went up to the actual border one day, and it was the very first time that I'd always seen war from a military perspective, from logistics, tactics, etc. And so when I got onto the border and I was faced with this like massive humanity all fleeing war, that was the first glimpse of the effects of war. And it was really quite powerful. And it was awkward. I felt awkward putting the camera in people's faces at that point. I felt like I was intruding. But what I realized was that these people had all been through the same hell. And so they didn't really talk to each other about it that much. But as soon as somebody else was there, asking them questions, it was a deluge of the response. So I got over that hump. But I also realized that at the same time, if you're going to be entrusted with them stories, there's an immense responsibility on you to do something with that and not just be there and listen and make the right noises.
So you were you started cold, really. You were kind of dropped in. You hadn't had training or, in photo or any of that kind of stuff.
None at all.
But it's interesting that it's the kind of, the ethical issues kind of struck you very early on then.
Yeah. It was a real sense of responsibility about what I'd been told.
Yeah.
And also the stories they were telling of what was happening inside. And, there was a natural part of me wanted to know, to see what was happening inside. So I kind of spent about a week on the border. Then I teamed up with the Danish journalist, Thomas Oobsen, and together we kind of jumped the fence, so to speak, went into Kosovo, and then spent the next 6 months documenting, what we were actually seeing. So by the time I came out, I felt like I had a pretty full package, an idea of what was going on.
Yeah. And obviously you kind of built a career then going on to work for, lots of, major newspapers and magazines and so on, but principally in conflict photography.
Yeah, mostly that's where all of the work came from.
Yeah.
It was I think word gets out from your initial work, and then the ability to always say yes when an opportunity comes up, because a lot of people get asked and for very good reasons say no.
Yeah,
I think of a lot of good reasons to say no sometimes, but I really did. And I think once that kind of sets the tone for the way things work.
So then, thinking back about those kind of conflicts you covered through the kind of 2000s, the 90s to 2000s and onwards, when did sort of the need to think about safety better and to start planning about safety, when did that start to kind of impinge on you a bit?
Well, it was strange because the relationship I had with Marie Colvin, with the Sunday Times, we met after I'd built a boat to sail from Syria into Iraq and got captured and kept held for a few days and treated quite badly. And she heard about that and she thought that was fantastic. So we were still at that age of journalism where it was like, get the story and be damned. There was very little there was very little in the line of safety in place at that point. It was like we were given a big bag of money and told to go and get the story.
Yeah.
Which worked. It was after Marie was killed in Syria. That's when I noticed on Fleet Street and with all the editors, there was a massive reconsideration of how things were done, and how journalists were allowed in, and them days of just roaming the planet were kind of over, really.
It's interesting because I think in TV news, which is where I come from, that kind of realization happened in the Balkans during the 90s, where the BBC, we lost 8 people in 8 years, not all of them in the Balkans, but that was the point at which we started to take safety more seriously and think about the first hostile training courses and all the rest of it. And our sense is that print was a bit later than that, basically.
They were very much late to the game. I do remember. I mean, we all, as you know, we all bump into each other in the field, and I got to know all of the BBC, Kev Sweeney and that lot at the BBC did their security, and we were always amazed. It was like, wow, you check these things, or you have to ask permission. But I think the events of after February 2012, print pretty rapidly caught up, and I think it's more a universal now.
Yeah.
So it's been brought in stages.
Yeah. Now I know I was reading, you look back at what happened in Homs and said, you're not sure that actually you'd have done very much differently. But are there other situations you've been involved in Libya or wherever else, where you look back and you think, actually, we were taking a bit too much of a risk there, and with hindsight and experience now, I might have gone about that a different way?
Look, I'm mercifully free of them kind of issues, because up until Homs, that was one of our main built-in features, and certainly me and Marie, so we would often be finding ourselves driving down a desert road, and for no reason at all, we both look at each other and go, this doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
And we unanimously agree, let's turn back. And that very rarely we had a few close shaves where we showed up at checkpoints that we should have done our homework. We actually did one show up at a Gaddafi checkpoint,
right,
with Gaddafi forces still intact. But most of the time, we relied on our sense of, just reading the environment. If there were no people on the streets, why weren't the people? It was midday.
Yeah. So it's experience and intuition. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, on the way into Homs the second time, we had a conversation where, I got that feeling, and I said to Marie, I said, something doesn't feel right. And really for the very first time, she turned around, she said, well, I'm the journalist, you're the photographer. If you want to go home, you can, which was obviously never going to happen. And then what happened. But that was the only time that we ever really didn't listen to our instinct. And when your senses are screaming at you, something's not right, something's generally not right.
Yeah. And as I understand it, when you were injured, Paul, in Hom, your leg was pretty badly injured, and you had to, put a 200K on yourself and do some pretty basic kind of battlefield first aid to give yourself some time until help could get to you and all the rest of it. Did that come out of your military training, basically, understanding what you needed to do?
Yeah, that was built in, and second, an absolute immediate reaction. I saw the massive hole in my leg. I put my hand in, grabbed the artery, checked the artery was intact, checked the bone was intact. But I knew I had minutes, not half an hour. I had minutes on which to act. And without doubt, that aspect of it saved me life. The more that is automatic to you, you can't be squeamish. You have to react. And that's, that we'll come on to it, but that's pretty much what I'm trying to teach on the course we're doing at the moment.
Because I think when I look back at some of the the people I know of who have been badly injured and died, a lot of it has been because they bled out when perhaps they didn't need to, or if they'd been with someone who knew some pretty fundamental first aid, then maybe they could have had a bit more time.
Yeah.
And so
it really doesn't. It's amazing what is survivable. and just the use of pressure points and tourniquets will get you through that initial survive operation. By the time if you can keep someone alive 2-3 minutes, generally help is on the way.
Yeah.
You know, you're never really that far away from in a situation. Whereas if you can keep the blood, staunch the blood flow, keep the breathing, that somebody will get there, and you know you've done your bit. Then you can stand back.
Yeah,
you can get people through them first few minutes. That's vital.
So that basic first aid is a big part of kind of the awareness and the stuff you need to know. So tell us what you're doing in Ukraine at the minute. You're running courses for freelancers, basically, who may be going into conflicts, reporting conflicts for the first time, and you know, who are you working with, and what kind of things do you cover, and what are the issues that come up there?
Well, it started. I'm doing it with Vaughan Smith and the Frontline Club and the Frontline Freelance Register, and that was born of once the invasion, once the war in Ukraine started and it kicked in. You know, there was a week, I think, where 7 journalists were killed, and we all kind of looked at each other and thought, well, this is exactly the kind of, it's the place we can do good. You know, there will be an absolute swathe of young. You make your name in this game by going to these places and doing it, you know, which means there's going to be a lot of young journalists, a lot of young, inexperienced journalists heading out there. It's more or less in the middle of Europe. You can get a Ryanair flight for 30 quid. It is going to be awash with people trying to make their name, and they are going to get injured and killed. So the idea was to take a basic HEF at the health, you know, the safety training course and first aid course, and strip it down and make it very country specific. You know, it doesn't need the desert warfare survival in it. So that's what we've done. I've worked out a course that's a 1-day safety course, and then 2 days that is run by Ukrainian paramedics, combat medics. So I will cover all aspects of trying to survive the front line, you know, just the real basic do's and don'ts. And, you know, and it's as I explained to the students, I said that every little part I teach you, maybe it's a percentage game. It's like 0.5%, this 0.5%, this 0.5% attached to everything, you know, adds up to 10%. And if you're 10% safer at the end of doing a 1-day course, then you're 10% safer. And the same with the first aid, you know, it's if we can give them that information and the psychology that, you know, they have when you're attacked and when there's an explosion, when people next to you are screaming with their legs are blown off, you know, you systematically your body will your system will be full of cortisol and you know, endorphins that will make your body. It doesn't make you clever though. That's the thing. It doesn't make you any smarter. It makes you do a lot of other things, but you have to use that time given to the best effect. And that is, you know, that is staying alive and making the correct decisions in them first minutes. So that's the whole emphasis is geared to that. So at least they have a fighting chance if God forbid something should go wrong.
And I think I don't know if it was something that you said, and I just thought, yeah, that is such a good, very basic piece of advice. If you suddenly find yourself under fire or something, close down the fear and just buy yourself a few moments to think properly, because a lot of what goes wrong happens in moments of panic.
Most people in them situations die of a decision made in panic. You know, it's not easy when your body is screaming, do something, anything. It's not easy to just buy yourself that 20-30 seconds to analyze. And that's why I teach a lot, you know, the information about weapons and ranges and what weapons are being used. That's knowledge. If you can combine some knowledge and you have the ability to close the panic out for 30 seconds, you can generally make a poor decision good just by buying yourself that bit of time. So, you know, if they can walk out with anything, it'll be the ability to just not panic at a time when they may need to make a decision that will save theirs or other people's lives.
Great. And just finally, Paul, if you had, you know, 1 or 2 pointers to give to, you know, new graduates from this photojournalism course who may be wanting to go to Ukraine, or they may be wanting to go to some natural disaster, something, what would be the 1 or 2 things you'd say to them as they set out for the first time into what might be, dangerous territory?
Okay, look, it's very, very tempting when you get into these places to think that the best pictures are where things are going bang. That's an easy mistake to make. It's actually not quite true. The best pictures are human response to where them things are going bang. So you do not have to be on that very front line. No one really should be on that very front line. If you're getting the people's response, the emotional response to what's happening there, so do not make a beeline for where things are falling on your head, because that they probably will fall on your head, and you don't get very good pictures. You've got to be an absolute seasoned expert to shoot things blowing up, going well. So get close. You probably do have to be closer than the writer. But don't be misled into thinking that you have to have things falling on your head. And secondly, with any forces, if you get attached to forces and they're going into buildings and they're doing house to house combat, you don't have to be in that first people going into the house, because what you're gonna get is killed. Go in the second wave. Let the guys with the guns, with the experience, let them go in and find out what's in that building before you run in with the camera. Because if you get in that room and you're faced with a guy with an AK, that camera ain't gonna do you any favors. So don't let the bravado and of the situation make you think that you have to be going in the first person into every building. Go in the second. There's no shame in it.
All right. Great advice, Paul. Brilliant. Thanks very much indeed, and good luck with what you're doing out there in Lviv.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe. Take care. Cheers, Richard.